Good afternoon, and welcome to AIADA's AutoTalk. I'm your host, Rachel Soleimani. For our new listeners, before I introduce today's presenters, a few quick notes. Everyone that is registered for today's program will receive a copy by the end of this week. And if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the lower right side of your interface under the Q&A bar. Today, we welcome back our good friends, the Used Car Super Team, CAR Global Chief Economist Tom Contos, CARFAX Senior Partner Development Manager Bob Grill, and past VP of Sales at AutoNation Automotive Consultant Mike Rossman. Guys, I know you have a lot to cover, and we're really excited to hear, so take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. This is Tom Contos, and I appreciate the opportunity to present again on what I affectionately tell everybody is a super session with the AIADA. We always enjoy our relationship with AIADA and want to support the organization and its membership every way we can. And hopefully some of the value-added information we'll provide today will be a step in that direction. I call this presentation "The Perfect Storm Meets the Perfect Drought" because economists always talk about supply and demand. And basically what we have, and I could really cut my presentation really short by just telling you that supplies are short. It's a drought of supply right now, and it's kind of a perfect storm on the demand side, which is great for the opportunity that affords to dealers. So with that as kind of the backdrop, let's go ahead and go to our first slide here. I thought I'd start really macro and just talk about the sort of the political situation right now, with the new administration, kind of a fresh start in looking at some of these things that have been talked about for many years, and we thought there would be consensus built way back, maybe a couple administrations ago, on the need for infrastructure investment, because we economists especially are keen on the role infrastructure plays in supporting economic growth. And our infrastructure in the U.S. has gotten a little long in the tooth, especially roads and bridges and things like that. This infrastructure bill, though, really only shows about 5%, as this table shows, being dedicated. It's still big bucks. It's $115 billion of a $2.3 trillion proposal, but that's only 5% of the total. And what I think is interesting about this, and it's something that AIADA has been talking about on other programs, is the emphasis on EVs, because we do need to sort of build an infrastructure, if you will, of charging stations, and maybe even help sort of coax consumers in the direction of buying EVs, because from an economics perspective right now, the trustworthy, internal combustion engine has kind of become more efficient itself, less polluting, and very versatile. So consumers still spend most of their dollars in purchasing, traditional ICE or internal combustion engine powered vehicles, as opposed to EVs, which right now are really like in the low single digits as a percentage of total sales, and an even smaller percentage of the vehicles on the road. But with this bill, and with sort of the momentum that's been built not only at the political level, but even at the manufacturing level, with more and more manufacturers saying that they're going to be fully EV, their whole product lineup will be EV, including General Motors, talking about the time frame of 2035. So the movement is afoot to move towards EVs, and I think it's important for all of the folks on this call to sort of take steps as necessary to move in that direction, because I believe that train has left the station and will continue to build momentum going forward. So that's sort of a macro thing we may talk about more in the Q&A. So I'll just move to the next slide and talk a little more specifically now about what's going on in the economy. We know the vaccines are being distributed very, very quickly here in the U.S. very successfully, I would say. And we're starting to look at the possibility of herd immunity at around mid-year. Fourth of July might be the time frame that we can maybe see a loosening up of some of the restrictions that are still in place. Though we can't bank on that too soon, because obviously there's sometimes as soon as you let your guard down, these trends in cases and hospitalizations and positivity rates and things like that start to go in a negative direction. But we'll keep our fingers crossed on that front. And that is helping lower the rate of unemployment. It's now down to around 6%, which it was in, more than twice that earlier on in the pandemic. The left graph on this slide shows, though, that there's still a lot of claims each week for unemployment insurance. And the number there was 566,000 for last week's data. So that number is still very high. Historically, that's probably 2 or 3 times what we normally see. So, and you can kind of gather that from the little bit of this graph that was pre-pandemic at the beginning of this graph. And then, of course, it spiked up to the 6 million plus range. So we're not out of the woods, but we at least are moving in a positive direction with a reduced number of claims. And then the graph on the right shows that there's been some job gains as well. So the first couple of months last year, March and April, when the pandemic really brought the economy to a standstill, and people were furloughed and laid off, and businesses shut down. All of those things led to about 20 plus million job losses, which we've slowly brought back. I would say they're not really job additions like we would normally look at when we're looking at coming out of a recession. They're really job resumption. We're getting back to jobs that we might have had before, or slightly different jobs if the business we were working at got closed. But we're still a bartender, and we find a bartender job in a different establishment, just to give one example. And as you see in the data here, the job impact has been highest on the travel and leisure, hospitality portions of the economy. On the right-hand side, you can see that e-commerce, if you want to call it that, is still going great guns. That's the non-store retailers line on this graph. That's positive, as is other transportation and warehousing. So that's like last mile deliveries and warehousing for distribution centers that are providing for the digital retailing activity that's happening on sites, the most obvious one being Amazon. And so it's a little disproportionate the way the impacts have been felt within the economy from the pandemic. But little by little, those red bars, I think, will start getting towards zero. And we may have some permanent shifts, and that's worth considering as we pull ourselves out of this situation. It won't be the same normal that we had before. It'll be a new normal, to use an overused phrase, but it'll be a new normal. But hopefully, there'll be prosperity available really across the economy. And the government's done its level best to help that along. That's on the next slide. We've had some stimulus packages in the past administration and in the current one. You can kind of see that a little faintly on this. I apologize for that. But the gray bars at the bottom of these bar charts here, you can see in January and February of 2020, the government transfer payments, where money flows from the government to consumers and is available as income, was in the 500 billion range. But then with the first plan that was approved for stimulus, that number shot up to about 3.872, as you see, million. And that includes unemployment insurance and stimulus. So because we've had some expanded benefits from unemployment, to include, you know, businesses that might not have normally had, self-employed individuals who would normally not necessarily be eligible for unemployment insurance. So there was an expansion both in terms of the breadth of coverage and also the depth of coverage of unemployment, and that's part of the contribution. And then, of course, actual stimulus checks that were issued by the government, and that became income that consumers could spend or save or apply towards staying whole on their car loan, which is we'll talk about when we talk about repos here later on. You can see in January of this year that number shot back up to 2.9 trillion, and so when you look at the top bars there, the blue bars, which are sort of national income figures, those are in the trillions of dollars there. So we're hovering in the 20 plus trillion despite a recession. So normally in a recession, we'd see a big drop off in income, but the government stepped in to make up for any losses in wages and salaries, and more than made that up, which is one reason why we've got so much money out there available to spend on new and used vehicles. So we'll talk about that some more later. When you look at what consumers have done too with some of the money, they've saved it. They've just not been able to spend it in many cases. It's not necessarily prudence on the part of consumers. It's maybe just they didn't have any choice but to save the money. They could, as I say, apply it towards staying current on their bills, and that's been a positive factor coming out of this recession. And as the economy opens up, folks will, feel good that they've stayed current on their bills and have a little in their pockets to spend in addition to the money that they've gotten from outside, from the stimulus. They're able to use their own savings to maintain spending levels at a high rate. So these are some of the factors that I'm calling part of a perfect storm in demand. How is that perfect storm being manifested? We see that kind of in new car sales last year. In 2020, really, sales didn't drop anywhere near what we thought they would. They did drop by 2.5 million, as the top table here shows, for full year 2020 versus 2019. But a lot of that, over a million of that 2.5 million, was a drop off in fleet sales, not retail sales. And some of those fleet sales, a lot of those fleet sales, about a million of them, that drop off was for rental fleet. And so we'll talk about that later too, because that's part of the perfect drought in supply, is that about a million fewer rental cars were sold in 2020. And so those aren't coming home to roost here in 2021 like they normally would as off rental vehicles. So we can talk about that some more. And then the first quarter figures are also looking pretty good. There were only a few weeks in March last year that fell into the sort of the pandemic period, so that may have weakened the comparables a bit for March. But January and February was pre-COVID last year, so really it's a pretty apples to apples comparison there. And yet sales are up by almost more than 400,000 units, or 11.8%. So new car sales have done well. What's been maybe a limiting factor in not selling more new cars is this chip shortage that gets all the headlines. And we'll talk about it some more, but it's part of this perfect storm, because if you can't make new cars to the extent that would normally be required at a time when this much money is out there available for purchasing vehicles, well, dealers have to look elsewhere to stock up on an inventory of vehicles they can sell. And so they're out there buying as many used cars as they possibly can, which we'll be talking about a lot today. Going to the next slide, what's happening in the auction industry? In the physical auction industry, we underwent what looked like a Nike swoosh early on. Sales went to nearly nothing in March and early April. Then they started shooting back up because, lo and behold, the vehicles that were still on the ground at that point in time were fetching high prices, and sellers sold all of those they could. And then we thought, well, later on in the year, we might see more off lease volume. We might see more off rental volume. We might see more repos. Those never really materialized to the degree we thought they would. And we got kind of what I call a square root sign. The sales flat line at levels below prior year. And now I'm making my comparisons in the last few weeks to 2019. And even those comparisons, the auction industry is probably down roughly 20% from what the weekly volumes sold at auction were pre-COVID. So that's a lot fewer cars available. And then another reason that there's not as many at auction is that a lot of the vehicles are being sold pre-auction upstream. We host a lot of those sales at ADESA. We're kind of the leader in upstream remarketing of off-lease units. And you see that on the right-hand side. We sold a bunch of those. It kind of followed a similar pattern. Here I've also shown a green line that is the percentage of the vehicles listed upstream that got purchased upstream. And as you see, that number is above 60% right now. So dealers are taking all the cars they can when they come off lease rather than waiting to see those vehicles again, maybe in the lanes or, downstream at the physical auction. So that's another sort of bare spot in the supply picture, another portion of the drought in supply that I'm talking about here today. What's all that mean for used car values at wholesale? It means if you got a drought in supply and you got a perfect storm in demand, you're going to have really strong prices at wholesale. And on top of that, most of these vehicles have been sold in an online only environment. So when you look at these bars, which are weekly year over year percent changes, and I've split it out for cars, vans, SUVs, and pickups. Pickups have been really amazing throughout this time frame, but and the vans, there's a little noise in the data because sometimes we get more full-size vans and then we do minivans, and that kind of biases those bars up a little bit. But no matter how you slice it, the market's been strong across really all segments at double-digit year-over-year increases, and in some cases more than 20%. Some cases even more than 30% than the previous norm, whether that was last year or 2019. So very high prices. And as I say, a lot of these vehicles are being sold online only. So that means it's maybe a bit more, we're seeing that dealers are searching farther and wider for the vehicles that they need to have, and they're paying a bit more for them. I guess to some degree that gets eaten in the transportation. The efficiency of the transportation has improved, I would say, as we've moved to an online space, and in terms of cost, that's enabled dealers to bring vehicles in from a broader geography. The online only environment and the tools that are available, I think, make dealers more willing to search farther for the vehicles, and they really are incentivized to do that based on the good gross profits that they'll earn when they get those vehicles back home. I said I talk a little bit about repos. We thought we would start to see sort of those high unemployment figures that I gave you earlier on, where there's still about 8 million people fewer that have jobs that had jobs pre-COVID. So with that many people unemployed, you'd think that repo rates would be going way up, but they're not. And there's many reasons for that. I've tried to list them here on the right. And there's still some state moratoriums, maybe not on repossessions. Many times they're on evictions, but that kind of gets read, I think, by lenders as a moratorium on repossessions as well. So that's one reason we won't see them. Also, there's probably fewer folks going into delinquency or default because they've got government stimulus checks that enable them to stay, whole on their loans. And then lenders are working with borrowers to, defer or have forbearance programs to work out the terms to allow borrowers to kind of get through the tough period. So some of these repos will never happen. Some of the repos we thought we would have coming back based on the number of people that went out of work. We just won't see those repos. People will be able to weather that storm and come out of it okay. So just to summarize here, I talked about a perfect storm in demand, and first, in tough economic times, you always have a little bit more of a tendency for people to move from new cars to used cars. People become a little more conservative. They try to focus on value, and they might take a nearly new car versus a brand new car, and just move on. The chip shortage is adding to that. You just may not have the availability to buy a new car. So that's contributing to this perfect storm. The government stimulus money I talked about, that's providing a lot of liquidity for used vehicle demand. And then high savings rates I've talked about as well. And on the supply side, next page, we've got rental. I talked about the vacuum in 2021 of off rental vehicles because of the decrease in fleet sales in 2020 of rental vehicles. Now that may come back soon because rental rates right now are really high because rental car availability is pretty low. And as travel starts picking up, I think rental car companies will start ordering more cars for their fleet. The problem is manufacturers are going to emphasize producing vehicles for the retail public more than they are for fleet sales, which are always lower profitability. So I think that vacuum is going to be with us for a while. Off-lease units, many of the off-lease cars are coming back in the money as far as the equity you have in the vehicle. You probably haven't driven it in the last year as much as you would have. So it's that vehicle's now the residual value on the lease contract is a very attractive purchase price. So a lot of people are buying their cars at the end of the lease, or the grounding dealer where the lease was originated buys the car, and we never see it either upstream or at the physical auction. So that's another drought in supply. Repos we talked about. Commercial fleet vehicles are also, people are driving less for business purposes because there's less travel. With that being the case, some of these vehicles that would cycle out from commercial fleets are being delayed. So that is another perfect drought in supply. And then dealer consigned units. Dealers, first of all, aren't taking many trades that they don't try and retail out of, and whatever excess trades and unaged units that they do have, they're offering those many times on sites like our own at Car Global. We have Backlot Cars, and there's other channels like that out there, dealer to dealer channels. So a lot of that is happening outside the actual auction system. Though dealer consignment has been coming up a little bit in the last few weeks, dealers may have some aged units that they want to go ahead and liquidate and take advantage of the really strong pricing environment right now. If you're getting near retail prices for your wholesaled units, many dealers are saying, I'm going to go ahead and you got to know when to hold them and fold them. So a lot of dealers are going ahead and folding cars that they can to take advantage of the strong wholesale values that are out there. So that's it for me right now. I'm going to just hand it over now to Bob Grill and Mike Rossman, and they'll take the rest of the way, and I'll see you all on the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Nice job as always. Always a pleasure to sit back and listen to you explain the mess that we're all living in. So thank you for your words of wisdom in that. My name's Bob Grill, CARFAX Senior Partner Development Manager. Happy to once again be part of the Used Car Super Series, and I'd like to give Mike Rossman a moment to say hello. Mike?
Hello, everybody. Glad to be with you today.
We are going to take it back to the ground level. Tom, as always, looks at it from the 30,000 foot industry level. We're going to take a little bit more of a grounded approach and look at the dealers themselves. And what we'd like to do with you today is take a look at what we call controlling the controllables. And without question, the inventory supply, as Tom alluded to, is number one concern for dealers today. Every meeting we're in, every session we sit in, every group we get into, everyone's talking about inventory and the lack of it and the difficulties in getting it. So we're going to look at the controllables, right? What can we control at our dealership level for obtaining inventory? The first and foremost, as always, king of the mountain is trades, right? You trade for a car, that means you sell a car. The only way to take a trade is to sell a car, so that'll always be number one. Then the service department, taking a look at some of the best practices on how to drive some inventory out of service. Again, this is an inventory focus, not a sales focus, so we'll touch on that when we get there. And then, as Tom mentioned, also those lease returns. Those lease returns are an absolute valuable commodity, and we're going to spend a little time taking a look at those. So if we start out with the trade-ins, right? If we start out taking a look at numero uno, it's trade-ins. Funny thing about the trade-ins, though, is when you look at the industry. Now, we know last year is going to have a whole lot of anomalies in it, but if we go 3, 4, 5 years in the past, we can see the future too. It's funny because when you look at trades versus purchases, and there's only two categories, you either traded for the inventory or you didn't, right? Everything else falls into that purchase category. When you take a look at historical events, 17, 18, 19, it was the same in 20. About 2/3 of what actually sold at the dealerships were trades, right? About 2/3 of what actually sold were trades. And a little over 1/3 are purchases, okay? So are trades important? Absolutely. They sell better, they make more money, they turn faster. It's really that simple. As a matter of fact, if you look at it, trade-ins sell on average 10 days faster than purchases. They average about $1,000 more profit than purchases. But if you look at what actually sold versus what's actually was in stock, now this is 19 because I don't have the 20 compiled yet. They're still compiling that. There's a lot of noise in the 20 numbers. But again, historically, it hasn't changed 2 percentage points. And that is what actually sells is over 1/3, just over 1/3 of purchases versus, like we talked about, the trades. But what was in stock is the polar opposite. What's usually in stock is about 40% trades and about 60% purchases, right? What's the net result of all that? Well, the net result of that is if you look at your dealership's actual wholesale losses, 80% of those losses are attributed to outside purchases. Now, not all purchases are the same. If you have internal rental cars through your dealership, if you have service loaner programs through your dealership, if you're buying internal through your manufacturer programs, you know, those tend to vary a little bit. But at the end of the day, without question, a trade-in sells faster for more money. It is your highest ROI capability. Now, if we're going to do this, we have to change our strategy a little bit. So, Mike, you want to speak to this one a little bit, thinking retail?
Absolutely. You know, when we're looking at appraisals, particularly, we want to look at what is the current retail pricing. As we know, it's quite high right now. So our wholesale books aren't really keeping up. So when we think about retail, let's talk about it for a minute. Add appraisal, let's use retail prices, and then from there work backwards, taking out our recon, your desired profit, versus wholesale plus. If you work from a wholesale plus, you're going to miss a lot of opportunity at the door. So we want to look at all trades as retail units. We know some of them aren't going to quite make it, but a lot more of them are making it today than have in the past. People are not afraid of these high mileage vehicles today. They do last a lot longer and they become value units for customers. But if not, one of the things that you need to do is still, in today's market, to extract the most value out of those cars that you're trading for. If you're not going to make them retail, let's at least detail them, let's change the oil, make sure they're look presentable and put them out on the market. When we do that, you'll find you're going to make some nice profit on those units as well. So let's think from retail all the way through our sales process and work from retail backwards, picking up the recon. And there, again, pointing out the recon, let's be sure that we're being fair with the service departments on our reconditioning, but let's not let them overcharge us. I think anything they would do for a customer, they ought to do for you. So if they're giving them an oil change special for $50, they should be charging you $75 at the dealership. So let's just keep that in mind and check those things out. I not long ago looked at a change on a set of wiper blades that they charged the dealership. They charged internally $200 to change some wiper blades. I don't think you get away with that with a customer. So you just need to go through those repairs, make sure everybody's being fair, and if it is, should be fair to service, but they shouldn't overcharge you as well.
You know, the other item to that too, Mike, is, you know, let's say I'm a Highline store, you know, a BMW, Mercedes, maybe a Lexus store, Infiniti, something like that. And traditionally, I would trade for a pickup truck, and that just doesn't really fit my criteria, so I would wholesale that out. Well, in today's world, with such a lack of inventory, you know, if that's a good retail piece that does well in your market, you need to take a second and third look at that to keep that for retail. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. If you drive by dealerships today, I see a lot of pickup trucks at the Porsche dealer that's right down the street from me. So
yeah,
how they're keeping them today and retailing them quite well.
Yeah. Well, if we look at the values today, and you know, Mike alluded to it, and Tom for that matter, you know, prices are so rapidly changing. You know, all the industry books and the different evaluation books, it's hard to keep up. But one thing we need to be careful of today, more than ever before, this has been a growing trend, and it's certainly prevalent today, is we want to be careful as to what we associate as market pricing, right? Market pricing tends to take a look at a year, make, model, and miles, and kind of puts everything in the same bucket, and then we end up with an average, right? In this case, a 2017 QX60, 34,000 miles with an average of 24,780 as your wholesale starting pricing, right? Your wholesale valuation. But at the end of the day, you got to peel the covers back a little bit. You got to take your time. You know, that's the total run, and that's the average. But the first part of that run, those are less desirable pieces, right? Those are less desirable pieces. Those are vehicles that have some accident history or some rental history or wrong colors or wrong options or poor condition. Well, the same is true on the opposite end of the scale. On the opposite end of the scale, you got your one owners, your no accidents, the right colors, the right options. Well, cars on the left, you're not going to overpay for cars that are less desirable, at least not for long. And you can't steal the cars that are the better fit, the better options, the better colors. You got to pay up. So at the end of the day, even at a base wholesale starting level for a 2017 with 34,000 miles, you have a $3,000 price swing just in the median point. So you got to be careful. You can't paint everything with a brush. There's no two used vehicles that are alike. You need to find the differences. You need to evaluate them accordingly, right? You need to work retail backwards. Certified for your franchise dealers. Certified is an absolute golden ticket, right? You need to maximize your ability and what your advantages are. Mike, you want to go over a little bit of active trade appraisal, maybe win a few more trades?
Well, I think it's certainly important, and if I hope most everybody today is familiar with an active trade appraisal, and by that we mean involving the customer in the trade rather than letting them stay alone in the showroom while somebody's out looking at their car. And one of the first things you need to do is whoever's appraising the car, they need to be sure they leave the salesperson behind. And the reason for that is when we get ready to negotiate the deal, they can really side more with the customer rather than with the manager. They're just following direction from that aspect. So I think it improves their relationship with the customer. But the active trade appraisal, if we include the customer at the car, it removes a lot of the mystery that's going on with the customer. What are they looking at? What are they talking about? What are they doing to my car? So it reduces that fear and the mistrust that some of the customers may have. So I think it's critically important we do that. It also is helpful for your salesperson when they're negotiating their deal. And maybe a lot of that doesn't happen today as we go to one pricing, but it does lessen their strength of objections to their vehicle because they've witnessed the appraiser looking at the car, understanding what the car is going to need as far as reconditioning and those type of things. So it increases that credibility of recon on the sales menu if you're using that, which I would highly recommend that you use your recon on the sales menu when you're talking to your customer. And it will help you, I think, and we've had it proven in history with a lot of the people that we work with, that you'll hold more gross and you'll actually win more trades when you use an active trade appraisal. So I think it's vitally important that your people are doing that. In some cases, a customer may say, hey, I'm not going to go with you. You just go ahead and look at my car. Fine, we don't want to argue with them, but I think they'll like to be involved. And it really does help you review the car with them, talk about it, asking the right questions. Is it a one-owner car? Did you buy this car new? Did you buy it used? Has it ever been and had any physical damage? Just questions that you would ask that you could get a response to with the customer. It'll help you immensely.
You know, that is incredibly important, Mike, because we know 7 out of 10 consumers have a vehicle to trade or sell on their own or dispose of. So as we're trying to accumulate inventory within, certainly if we can maximize our trades, that'll help us. But it's also where we lose 70% of our car deals, right? It's right there at that trade amount. So anything we can do to take the onus off the trade, take the fear out of the trade and involve the customer and win more trades, it's a win-win. But if we take a look at what trades are created by what, it's interesting because new car trades, new cars are usually bringing in 1 to 3 year old trade-ins. It's that new car customer who's always looking for the new model and every 2 to 3 years trades in the older model. So your typical trade-in coming in on a new vehicle is 1 to 3 years old. And your typical trade-in coming in on a used vehicle is typically 6 to 7 years old, right? If you're taking in a trade on a 5-year-old vehicle, in most cases it's going to be older than that. Okay, so where's the sweet spot? Well, that sweet spot's in our old friend Certified Pre-Owned. Certified Pre-Owned will bring in that 4 to 6 year old trade with 48 to 72,000 miles, which is the sweet spot for ideal inventory, right? It's that 4 to 6 year old vehicle with 48 to 72,000 miles. They sell fast, they turn quick, they bring the money. It's the lifeblood of our used car department. So if you're looking at your used car inventory, and it's a bit of an anomaly lately, you're kind of going with whatever you can get your hands on. But under standard conditions, if you look at your used car lot and you only have 1 year old inventory or vehicles that are old, it's because you're not being robust enough in your CPO, which will drive those ideal inventory trades, right? So let's slow down a minute. Let's go into our next level, which is our service department. How do we go with our service department and find inventory? Remember, this is inventory acquisition, not trying to sell your service customers a car. You don't want to take your best customers who come back for service and pull them out of that service department waiting area and try and talk to them about buying a car. Now, to talk to them about showing interest in their car, that's a whole different element, right? And that we want to be clear on that. Because here's the truth. The fastest selling, most profitable inventory there is homegrown inventory. It's the fastest selling, most profitable inventory there is. It's when you sold the car brand new, you've done all the service and maintenance on that car, the customer's trading that vehicle back in, you've done all the reconditioning on that car, and now it's for sale in your used car inventory. Fastest selling, most profitable there is. It usually doesn't make the weekend. So how do you obtain more of these vehicles, right? How do you obtain more of these vehicles? Well, we know that if they've been in your service department in the last 12 months, according to Cox Automotive, they're 74% likely to return for their next vehicle. As a matter of fact, C&W and Toyota Motor Company found that if they were loyal since the beginning, since they bought that car new, if they were loyal to your service department, they would be 86% return rate to buy their next vehicle. Okay, But there's some best practices for sure. Again, these are your best customers. You want to handle them correctly. You want to do it right. So, Mike, you want to walk through some of that?
Absolutely. Again, as Bob mentioned earlier, let's think of acquisition and not trying to sell them a vehicle. That's critically important. So the service drive is an opportunity. You've got, depending on the size of your service department, 50 to 100 to 150 customers a day coming in there. So it's almost like having a line at the auction with those cars coming through the gate all day long. So let's do a few things. Let's offer them a free appraisal if they would like to think about what their car's worth today, and particularly with the prices as high as they are, some people may be amazed at how much their car could be worth today. There's an opportunity to offer them a free CARFAX or whatever company you use for reporting. You could certainly do that as well. The other thing I think that's important is to display a list of cars that you're seeking for your used car inventory in the service drive. That may spur a customer to ask the question of, and here again, if we know what cars are coming in, that they have appointments, and we've surveyed those prior to the service drive opening, you could actually put cars that you know are going to be in your lane on the list of cars you're looking for. So as a customer comes in, he sees, that 3-year-old car that he's driving posted, that boy, they would be a buyer for cars like that. We're looking for those cars for our used car inventory. So it may spur some interest from that customer. The other thing, of course, has always been important is to partner up with a service advisor. So if the customer does have a question, who do I talk to? I see you're interested in buying some cars, and he can direct them to the right person, and certainly put a spiff out there for your service employees as a finder fee to help find inventory. You're going to pay a lot sending somebody to the auction to do that for you if that's what your particular case is. The other thing that I would do there too is one more thing is put that same list in your customer waiting area that, these are the cars we're looking for, and just put a list in there with a contact number, call Joe at whatever phone number, and he can talk to your used car manager if they have an interest in that. And if we'll do that, it's a little hard work, but I'll tell you, you can buy some cars and you can get past that. I think they showed about a 5% purchase rate out of the service department. I think you could drive that number up to, maybe even 10%. So if you could pick up 7, 8, 10 cars a week, it would be dramatic for your used car inventory. And think about the other thing. Those are cars you've serviced. So you know the history. There will be no mystery for the buyer of that car, and it's going to sell for more and make more gross profit.
That's exactly right. Thanks for that added. Now our old friend Lease Return, right? You heard Tom say that they're keeping them more upstream. They're keeping them at the dealership, and that is the play, right? That is the magic between having those lease returns, taking your time, knowing that it's the best inventory available. They are the perfect CPO vehicle. What do we mean by that? Well, the most effective CPO inventory is 2 to 4 years old with 24 to 60,000 miles on it. As a matter of fact, it's about 80% of the CPOs that actually sell. A 1-year-old inventory most often prices too close to a new car, right? Especially with new car incentives and different things going on. A 1-year-old tends to be too close, and 5-year-old plus tend to be a little older and not necessarily fall into the CPO program. So that sweet spot for CPO is that 2 to 4 year old inventory, which is exactly what a lease return is, right? So it falls in that category. A few other things come into play. What sells well new sells well used. These cars obviously sold well. They're usually the right options. They're usually the right colors. They tend to have 12,000 miles or less a year on them. They're well maintained. You've got them through they tend to be one owner. They tend to be that homegrown inventory, and they are absolutely the perfect CPO inventory, right? Those lease returns. Now you got to remember, when you're evaluating your lease returns, don't just throw them in that market bucket. They're not the same as a third-party rental unit or a fleet unit or a commercial unit. It's a one-owner, personally leased vehicle that your service department most likely has taken care of its entire life. And every vehicle is unique. There are things that cause value to go up and there's things that cause value to go down. Okay. But a one owner, personally leased vehicle that's been well maintained by your dealership that you sold new and is a homegrown inventory is absolutely worth more money than some car you can buy somewhere, right? It's your best customer. You want to retain that customer. It's your best car because your mechanics have taken care of it. So don't miss out on your lease opportunities and evaluate them correctly, okay? When you look at that retail side of the market, any given market, a manufactured certified pre-owned unit is the top end of that retail value. On the opposite end of the scale is a bad title car. That's easy to understand. What's more difficult to understand, but is absolutely factual, is that every element causes an effect on retail. Did you want to add something to that, Mike? Did I cut you off?
Well, I just think the one thing we know today is if you've got a homegrown car, a one-owner vehicle that you've serviced, I just don't think you could hardly overpay for it in today's marketplace. In looking through a lot of the ads today, I see that late model 1 and 2 year old cars are bringing more than they brought when they were brand new, and the pricing of the vehicles today. So the market is hot. The one thing we know for sure, though, is that as soon as there's a ample supply of new vehicles, our used car prices are going to start going down rather rapidly. So the one thing that we need to be sure that we're doing is buying and selling in the same marketplace. So as you start to see an increase in your new car inventories, you better start looking at used car values and be ahead of the curve a little bit there, because we know that when that happens, used car vehicles will go down rather quickly from their all-time highs that they're at today.
Good point. So with that, we would like to say thank you and turn it back over to Dan and Rachel for any questions that may be out there.
Tom, Bob, Mike, thank you guys for continuing to keep us updated on the used car market. This information is really valuable, and we always appreciate you guys taking the time to come on here and speak with us. If anyone has any questions, you can email them to me, and I will pass them along to our super team. To everyone else on the line, join us back here on Thursday, May 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern as Federated Insurance talks current trends in theft and fraud. For more information about AIADA, visit AIADA.org. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.